Hey everyone, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're going to skip the usual preamble because we've got to dive straight into a massive compliance trap. It's one I've seen catching out-of-state employers completely off guard. If you run a business, manage a team, or handle HR, you absolutely need to stick around for this one.
Okay, let's dive into this. Have you hired a remote worker recently? Maybe you've expanded your team across state lines to scoop up the absolute best talent out there. I mean, it's the modern way to do business, right? But here's the thing. What seems like a totally standard, everyday hiring move could actually be opening up a very, very costly legal situation.
Let's look at a specific scenario to make this concrete. Imagine you're a tech company headquartered up in Delaware, and you just hired a brilliant developer who works remotely from their home office down in Miami, Florida. On the surface, this feels like a huge win. You found great talent, but hidden right beneath that exciting new hire is literally a compliance trapdoor. Let's look at why that initial honeymoon phase can quickly turn into a massive legal headache. That brings us to Section 1, the remote work trap. See, that single hiring decision we just talked about changes absolutely everything for your business because it introduces a critical concept, payroll tax nexus. Essentially, this is the legal requirement to comply with a state's payroll tax laws. And here is the absolute kicker that surprised me when looking at the source material. It is triggered immediately by having just one single employee performing services in that state. That's it, one person. Your Delaware company now has an immediate payroll tax nexus in Florida. So that whole myth that your out-of-state company is totally safe just because your headquarters are hundreds of miles away? Yeah, consider that completely dismantled. What's really interesting here is what you do not need to trigger this law. You don't need a fancy Florida corporate office. You don't need a bunch of inventory sitting in a warehouse or a physical storefront. Absolutely not. Just one single employee typing away on their laptop in the Sunshine State triggers total compliance. It's wild. But you don't need any sort of traditional physical corporate footprint in Florida to fall firmly under their jurisdiction. Moving right along to Section 2, your out-of-state obligations. Let's pivot for a second from the problem over to the solution. It all stems from this really foundational rule straight from the source material. The rule is simple. Where the work is performed is where the state unemployment tax must be paid. It all comes down to geography. The physical location dictates everything, and this fundamental rule sets up the exact steps that you, as the employer, have to take right now. So looking at the source material, I found a clear three-part roadmap. Step 1, get your RT number. Step 2, remit reemployment tax. Step 3, report to the new hire center. Now listen, these aren't mere suggestions. These are strict legal duties that require your urgent attention. Let's break these down and see exactly what actions you need to execute. All right, step 1. You must immediately register for a Florida Reemployment Tax account to obtain an RT number. This is your absolute non-negotiable first action item, because without it, well, you're basically flying totally blind in the eyes of the Florida Department of Revenue, and you definitely don't want that. Now, keeping that RT number in mind, let's talk numbers. So the crucial point is, once you have that RT number, you have to remit quarterly reemployment tax, specifically on the first $7,000 of wages paid to that remote employee. And then step 3 finishes off your initial obligations. You've got to officially report that new Miami developer to the Florida New Hire Reporting Center. Essentially, this step connects all the dots for the state. It officially confirms that your out-of-state business has a local worker under your employment. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, so here's a brief moment of relief, a true silver lining. Because Florida has no state income tax, you actually do not have to withhold state tax for that employee. Contrast this with the incredibly complex withholding requirements of states like New York or California, and it's a total breath of fresh air. This lack of state income tax in Florida actually simplifies one major step in your overall payroll process. Okay, that brings us to Section 3, the penalty warning. We had our brief moment of relief, but honestly, let's bring the tension back for a second, because this brilliantly illustrates what happens if you ignore these seemingly simple administrative rules. Your remote employee could later claim unemployment benefits that end up getting charged directly back to your company. But honestly, it gets worse. You could be facing years, literally years, of accumulated penalties simply for failing to register in the first place, right alongside additional years of penalties for failing to remit that tax. The financial drain here can be absolutely devastating to your bottom line. Which brings us to the most provocative and, honestly, urgent question you need to ask yourself today. Where else is your remote team working? If just one single developer in Miami triggers all of these Florida obligations, what hidden payroll tax nexuses have you unknowingly triggered in Texas, Ohio, or Oregon? It's like a giant puzzle. It is absolutely crucial to evaluate your entire remote workforce's compliance footprint right now, before those penalty letters start arriving in your mailbox. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Now, seriously, go check those employee zip codes.